We will compare the life of an average family in the USSR and the United States of America in the 70s because the comparison here is in favor of the Soviet system. Where 70s were stable, with no hunger and oil exporting time, while for the USA 70s, this is the worst decade of the 20th century after the Great Depression.
The average Soviet family lived in a small-sized 2- or 3-room apartment in a standard panel house with a total area of 323 to 495 square feet.
The average American family lived in their own house with an area of more than 1,000 square feet. They have 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, although this is an old, cramped housing dating back to the 60s or even older. In the 70s, the living space increased very much. A family of 3 or 4 already had 1,400 square feet, 440 for each, and in 80s, each person would already have 600 square feet of personal space.
1/3 of Soviet people still lived in communal flats. It is where multiple unrelated families lived together in their rooms, 1 kitchen and 1 bathroom were shared. To the waiting list for improved living conditions were placed only those who had less than 50-70 per square feet per person, and in some regions even 30 square feet, and this line would last for decades. But the apartment obtained in this way was not the property of the family, it belonged to the state, and people received like for indefinite use, such as rent. In the event of the death of the tenant, it comes to those who were registered in this apartment. However, there was another option to purchase housing. You could buy a cooperative apartment, but this was not available to everyone, but to those who have less than 70 square feet per person, and they also had to stand in line and pay a very large payment of from 3,000 to 4,000 rubles, when an average salary was 70 rubles per month. Here, even having money often could not help. You need to know the correct people.
At this time in the USA, a family, even with children, can buy a house thanks to a mortgage program, because the salary allows it. In an ordinary apartment in the States, each family member has his/her own bedroom, and there is also a dining room where the family can eat instead of the kitchen.
In the Soviet Union, only the families of officials, generals, and artists lived like this. All the other citizens had very modest living conditions, and because in 3-room apartment can live at least 10 people. Grandmother and grandfather, mother and father of 3 children, still a brother with a wife and children. So it was necessary to block off the space with closets and various kinds of improvised screens to create at least a remote feeling of, well, some kind of personal space. In USSR, 99% people did not have a telephone, so if you wanted to call, for example, to mother, if, of course, she lived separately, you needed got dressed and to go outside and find a telephone booth near home. In Soviet cities there aren't many of them. Residents of large cities have to go to the metro, and in a small town, you just go to the city center to look for one of the 3 telephone booths that are usually there. Okay, you found one. But mom doesn't have a telephone at home either, so you will call her to the job place. Enterprises usually were telephonized. Home telephones were a luxury. For telephone installation, you had to stand in line for years, or even decades, or call on personal matters from the work phone. To order conversations with another city, you need to go to a special place, most often in the post office, where there are several booths with telephones. For a long-distance call in some places, you generally need to order a conversation in advance and then come at the appointed time.
U.S. citizen at that time doesn't have to go anywhere. You and your mom have phones at home. Long-distance calls were expensive. But this is just such a level of technology at that time. In general, in the States, in '75, already 90% of families did have their own telephones.
2/3 of Soviet citizens had a refrigerator. The rest could save food only in the winter. They just hang it in a string bag outside the window. In addition, there were common cold cabinets. It means that in the outer wall of the house they made a hole. In a formed niche, you could put pots or something else perishable during the cold season. Washing machines were present in 2/3 of families, but not automatic. You have to manually pour in and out water and manually wring out. The machine can only spin clothes. Water does not even heat. Delicate fabrics cannot be washed. To obtain a washing machine standing in the couple-year line and paying the couple month salaries are required. In the early 70s, 16% of Soviet families had a vacuum cleaner, but it was not very useful for dust gathering, more suitable for scaring cats. Those who lived in the countryside didn't have indoor toilets, may not have gas, sewerage, or heating. In some places, there wasn't even electricity.
All American families have refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, and washing machines. These were automatic with the same operating principle as now. You just need to load the laundry and after washing, take it out. In the mid-70s, more than a third of families had dishwashers. They began to appear in houses in the late 1940s.
In general, Soviet technology is a decade behind its Western counterparts, and in terms of the price-to-wage ratio, it is incredibly expensive. All things are not of high quality, often break, and spare parts are not available at any moment of time. What could the Soviets have on their kitchen table? It depends on their position and connections. Most likely, there is a pot of canned fish soup and some kind of porridge, maybe milk and kefir, or processed cheese, but only if milk at this moment is not in a shortage. The word deficit or scarce is familiar to every Soviet person. Any product can become in short supply, even the most ordinary ones. For example, meat, boiled and smoked sausage, butter and vegetable oil, cheese curds, fruits, chocolate, and candy. And if you are an ordinary family, not some officials or party workers, nothing from this you do not have ability to find. And if such a product is thrown to store shelf somewhere, there is a huge line to get it, to snatch a blue bad-smelling chicken or a terrible piece of meat, or rather, the bones and tendons, after standing in a long, long line. A man in a store asks the saleswoman, "Don't you have any fish?" She answers, "Comrade, this is the meat shop. We don't have any meat here. The fish they don't have at the shop across the street." Where you can buy some meat is on a market from people who grow animals by themselves, but the price will be double or triple. But in a specific region, such as Moscow and Leningrad, or another large city, before the holiday at the Enterprise, they received a food set which contained even caviar and raw smoked sausage, mayonnaise, sprats, and other rare delicacies. For money, of course, not for free. But what about fresh vegetables, all sorts of tomatoes, cucumbers, or fruits? In the winter, you can completely forget about all this until spring. Common practice was to go from your small city to Moscow to buy some sausages. Sausage train was the name of transport used for this. Officials or diplomats lived in another reality. For them was available a system of special distribution that provided a wide list of goods, foods, and appliances, which for ordinary people simply not intended to be, and available not only for holidays, but for any time. Finding clothes in Soviet Union was hard, especially for kids or winter. Good and quality ones were a pipe dream. More likely, you can have domestic production sneakers. Uncomfortable, rather ugly at best, shoes made in Czechoslovakia, which were very much appreciated because they were much better than Soviet ones, but they are in terrible shortage. And if you are lucky and has found something, winter shoes or suit for example, it will cost you a month's wage. So very useful skills were sewing and knitting, and it wasn't a hobby, it was necessity.
The American family can buy any clothes and shoes. Non-food products are also sold everywhere, and everyone can afford it. Since the beginning of the 70s, stores have been flooded with cheap synthetic clothes of all colors and styles. There was no hunting for things.
Feminine hygiene items? In Soviet Union, they just didn't have them. Cotton, wool, gauze, and rags, that's all. The Soviet industry does not produce any such special products. Toilet paper was also in short supply. Soviet citizens were asked to tear newspapers into squares and before using, crumple them well. Needless to say that for Americans, this is a wild thing. All kinds of feminine hygiene products are already in abundance, and toilet paper too. There was a story. One Soviet citizen entered a supermarket in a capitalist country. She walked through rows with an abundance of diverse goods. What she saw was making a very strong, shocking effect. She never saw that huge assortment. And when she stared at a variety of possible toilet papers, she just could not stand it. She lost consciousness and fell down onto the ground. Now about interior renovations. If Soviet family wants to do repairs, then they won't find building materials on the open market. Tiles, boards, pipes, plumbing and lighting too. there is a shortage, you can try to get it through connections. If you work at an enterprise where some of this is produced, the easiest way for you is to steal what is necessary. It is a completely common way of survival in conditions of a total shortage of everything. Theft of state property is not condemned in any way in society, even welcomes.
In US, there won't be any problems with buying building materials, furniture, and decor. You certainly won't need to steal anything. They regularly publish a catalog with new trends in the interior and what colors are fashionable.
In 1970, in the main republic of USSR, there were 5.5 personal cars per 1,000 people, 0.5%. There was a government distribution system. To buy a car, you submit an application to purchase a car at your place of work. They consider it for some time, check your biography, evaluate whether you are worthy of having a car at all. A party meeting will be held there, and if your candidacy will be approved, you wait in line, which can last 5 to 10 years. All these years, you need to save money. With a salary of 70 rubles, a VAZ 2103 cost 7,300 rubles. The Volga 24 also has the price, it equals 9,200, but they don't sell it to anyone. ZAZ 968 was more affordable and cost 3,500 rubles. When you are buying your long-awaited vehicle, the color of the body you, of course, cannot choose. Whatever they give you, you take it. But if you have acquaintances in the party, trade union, or an auto shop, you can go unnoticed and, of course, illegally climb into the front of the line. For war veterans, especially with medals, there was the right once in life to buy a car without waiting in line. Another fact, in the USSR, a used car costs several times more than a new one because you don't have to stand in line. Another problem with cars is that they broke sometimes. There were car services in the Soviet Union, but very few, and they were not affordable. The head of a car service was the king and the god. Spare parts you need to wait from several months to several years or somehow try to get them. Soviet men prefer to repair their cars themselves or with the help of friends.
In America, you can buy a car, of course, without any queue, and a used one can generally be bought very cheaply. In the 1970s, almost everyone already had a car.
In USSR, the main transport was the bus. So you take a bus, where could you go? Maybe to another city. With this, there may be difficulties. In the Soviet Union, there is an institution of residence address registration. If you leave for another settlement and plan to spend more than a month and a half there, you have to register out at your place of residence and register in a new place. Without the registration, you can live for 3 days, after which administrative liability comes. If you did not have time to register, this is your problem. Please pay the fine, but this applies only to those citizens of the USSR who have an internal passport. Peasants who were assigned to the collective farm had no passports. In the opinion of the state, they didn't need it. They worked there, by the way, not for money, but for so-named labor days. At the end of year, a couple of sacks of wheat were given, according to the quantity of labor days a person has for that period. The law, according to which it was necessary to pay in money, was adopted back in 1966, but no one was in a hurry to put it into practice. A collective farmer can get maximum to the regional center if you need to go to another city. For this, you have to submit an application to the board of directors of the collective farm, and they will consider it, evaluate the person, and maybe they will give a special certificate for one trip out to town. For a violation of the movement regime, there is a punishment, for the first time with a fine, and in case of repeated violation, you can find yourself in prison. However, there are social elevators for collective farmers because workers are needed everywhere. To get the right to have a passport, you need to sign up for some hard and unpopular job. On distant construction sites or factories, there is also a way to join an army or some other service, for example, the police. And, of course, through a bribe. But the board of a collective farm may not approve the transfer of an employee to another job, especially if it is the middle of agricultural work, and if management believes that this worker must stay and work in the field, or if they simply don't like you.
In the USA, of course, there were any restrictions to move around the country.
Only residents of large cities in the European part of the country can apply for a vacation trip to, for example, Black Sea. Sanatoriums belong to trade unions. To get there, can only employees of certain enterprises and institutions. You receive a voucher, that is a referral to a vacation, with a certain range of sanatorium resort services for the family. The trade union pays for a significant part of it. But for example, in 1975, In trade union health resorts, only 8.3 million people, or 3.2% of Soviet citizens, went to sanatoriums, and you will not have a separate room like in a hotel. Of course, it all depends on the specific sanatorium, but most likely, if one person is traveling without a family, he or she will be provided with a bed in a shared room. Also, there were situations where many beds were placed on an open balcony to receive all vacationers. Also, you can go without a permit. Then, you need to rent a room or a corner in the house of a participant, and after arrival, the owner of the living space must take your passport, go to the police to register you for the duration of your stay. To the destination you will go by train. There is no money for a plane. Entertainment at the resort, there will be a sea, dancing, excursions, walks. From the trip, you will bring string bags full of fruit or maybe a whole box, because they grow in the south, and in your town, you can't get it even in season, they just are not imported. The officials who made the logistics decision just are not interested in the real demand. Another option for a family vacation is a favorite dacha, but it's hard to call it a vacation. Rather, physically hard work. On dachas, Soviet people grow their own food in their free time because they couldn't have it in another way. You can also go camping, but you have to sew a tent from a somewhere stolen parachute fabric. There are no tents for sale. Children can be sent to a pioneer camp. It is like a scout organization. Foreign trips. They are available to very few people. So, to be allowed to go abroad even in some fraternal socialist country like Bulgaria, you must have an ideal biography without a hint of anti-Sovietism, and you need to go through a commission at the district party committee. Those to whom permission was granted can only travel in a group. They are introduced to a special employee who monitors every step they make. Of course, in the Soviet Union, there were special people who travel abroad and relax in elite sanatoriums. These are party officials, generals, KGB employees, and their friends. They lived as if in a completely different country. They have everything: scarce food and large apartments, imported furniture and cars, and recreation at the highest level.
American families also used to go to the sea. National parks are very popular. Air tickets are still quite expensive, so most families travel in their cars. Some Americans have small buses just for family, and those who are richer just fly by plane to Europe or to some islands. Trip to the USSR. Basically, you can get there, but you need to go through a strict process of obtaining a visa. And upon arrival on the tour, the structures present a special KGB guide who controls every step, so the foreigner does not see anything wrong or doesn't start asking the citizens how they live. American families with children loved Disneyland very much.
3/4 of Soviet families had a TV, but it was black and white. Few people had color TVs, and it cost from 500 to 700 rubles as salary for 6 months. Black and white cost 3 times cheaper. And what was shown here? There were only 2 all-union channels, where most of the time ideologically correct programs or films were shown, such as broadcasts of a Politburo meeting. Soviet cinema. Indeed, from time to time, film studios made successful films, sometimes downright masterpieces. But most of the Soviet cinema production was just unnecessary garbage about excellent workers of socialist labor and happy collective farmers.
At this time in the US were available all kinds of entertainment programs, TV series. There is cable television that works without antennas and allows you to receive many additional channels. Everyone who wanted had TVs, and of course, color ones.
To find an interesting book in USSR was hard. If we go to a bookstore, we will find there a great abundance of collected works of Lenin and collections of decisions of party congresses that no one needs, and fiction on industrial topics about all sorts of milkmaids and workers. In the Soviet Union, they easily printed 300,000 copies of books, which is hard to see when quantity is regulated by the market and real demand. Were not uncommon publications with millions of copies, and these are only books, not counting newspapers. But the publication of magazines, books, and newspapers were under strict control by the state. Information that contradicts communist ideology is prohibited. For independent reprinting, prohibited literature people were sent to prison. Willingly published was fiction, where they accused the rich class and the capitalist system, and the main characters are nice poor people and workers. Such books have been written by the Soviet writers for years and have been translated from other languages. Ideologically neutral books were published too, adventure literature, classics of the 19th century, educational books. But it is very difficult to find such books on sale. If you care about reading good literature, you'll have to hunt for it. If you're lucky and manage to get a decent book, you'll be forced to buy an ideologically correct novel about party workers as a load. That's how it was called. In general, load sales were a way to artificially increase sales figures. Same thing with tickets to the theater. For a good performance, you could be obliged to buy tickets for a second-rate production. Another example is to buy a can of cabbage for an item of scarce food. In '74, they launched a program for exchanging waste paper for a book, 20 kilograms of unnecessary paper and cardboard, mostly old newspapers and boxes, was exchanged for a coupon, which gives the right to buy one good book. It is not surprising that in the USSR there was a black market for books. Traders risking their freedom resold normal books at triple the price. The better situation was with children's books. It was possible to publish just books without ideology, fairy tales from countries of the world. They were superbly illustrated and seem to have value even now, but also were the books with the ideological indoctrination of children.
In the United States, any book from vast quantities could be bought with any complications. Circulations are regulated by demand.